Awesome. And I think we're going to start with Uni, and Uni, I'm going to share and walk your deck, yeah?
Yes, thank you.
Awesome. So hopefully GoToMeeting. Okay. Yeah, this is not. I'm really sorry. GoToMeeting seems to be.
You okay?
Yeah, I changed the permissions. I restarted the browser, and it's not taking, unfortunately. Maybe Uni was this. Maybe this is what was going on with you as well.
Uni, can you share?
Yeah, I cannot share. No.
I don't seem to be able to either.
Okay, I'm gonna stop recording. We're gonna fit.
Yep. Cool. Hi everyone. My name is Uni, and I am a senior solutions architect here at LaunchDarkly. I will be presenting so the capabilities of LaunchDarkly, more importantly, feature flags and how feature flags enable DevOps. When I think about DevOps really integrates at the point of deployment. So a lot of our conversation today will be around that. How often do you deploy? What does deployment look like? And so next slide. I'm going to kick things off with two questions, and I want you to think about them over the course of me talking. How often do you deploy? And I encourage you to answer that, in chat or think about that as I'm talking. And the next one is, what happens when that deployment causes problems? I think frequent deploys are the goal of many organizations, but there are a couple things that maybe are getting in the way of that. And so the rate of sort of deployment is subjective, and what may be fast to some organizations or some teams maybe not right for others. And so last year, LaunchDarkly partnered with Sleuth to produce a hyperdrive report. We surveyed software professionals to see sort of how many teams are delivering software. We surveyed teams that are delivering software and how there was sort of the rate of that deployment. And so, how often did they deploy? Unsurprisingly, the results were across, multiple weeks or multiple deployments per week or multiple deployments per month. And you can see right here, there's just a large mix of answers. So some people are deploying, many times a day, and others are deploying maybe just once a month. And thanks, Heidi. There's been a lot of research around continuous delivery with books like Accelerate, and we want to see people, of course, move faster, but do it in a safe way. I think moving fast is hard if you're deploying something and things are continuously breaking all the time. And one interesting sort of finding for me in this research is no matter how fast a team is going, they always want to go and move faster. And so what I mean by that is folks that are deploying once a month want to move to weekly deployments, and folks that are moving weekly want to move to deploying multiple times a day. And so why is that? What is this? Why do people want to move faster? I think the crux of this is because reports like Accelerate show that high-performing teams deploy at a higher frequency when compared to low-performing teams. And this isn't just based off of one report. The DOOR report has been getting and producing has been produced for years, and the results are very similar. And the interesting part is when you look at the reports over time, that delta between low-performing and high-performing teams increases each year. So I think a conclusion that folks might make is the secret to a high-performing team is to deploy more frequently. And I think that's right, but not exactly. I think it's missing the other piece, which is it's not just about the speed of that deployment, but it's also about how quickly those teams recover when things go wrong. And so here I'm looking at numbers of, lead time to from commit to deploy is 6,570 times faster, and those same teams are also recovering at that same speed. And so how do you get to this increase in speed of deployment and increasing in recovery time? And I mean, there's no silver bullet here, but it's sort of separating this idea of deployment and release. And one of the things that these stats that we're looking at point out is the use of the term deployments. And often I think deployments and releases are sort of used interchangeably, but they're not the same thing. And what I mean by that is release is sort of a business decision. It's expensive. It requires a high degree of coordination between your engineering team, your product team, your sales, support. And deployment is the act of sort of testing and verifying your code, whether it's in testing or production. And so when you're deploying code, you're not releasing that feature set or a functionality to your users. And the way to do this is feature flags. And so before I dive into feature flags, you can sort of think about feature flags is like a fancy if statement, but the definition that I want to use here is it's a control point in your code whose behavior can vary during runtime based on external input. And I want to provide this quick definition to set the foundation of release progression and the concept of progressive delivery. And so going back to the chart that we looked at earlier, where we looked at deployment speeds across organizations and software teams, the teams that are deploying faster are the teams that are using feature flags. So what I mean to say is feature flags are sort of enabling companies to, of course, deploy faster, but do it in a way that is safe. And they're able to think about sort of software delivery in a way that allows you to release incrementally and adopt sort of the progressive delivery methodology. So I use the term progressive delivery. Progressive delivery is about delivering changes in small, low-risk to small, low-risk audiences, and then expanding that to larger, maybe more riskier audiences, and sort of validating your results with sort of that larger radius of impact at every step of the process. And so release progression is sort of this cycle of going through iterations as you're deploying. When you think about like progressively releasing features, you're going through sort of each stage. The feature is being released behind a flag. You're maybe releasing it to your internal teams, maybe to beta testers. You're releasing in a production environment without impacting users. And you're sort of collecting this data, iterating to make sure that there's no negative impact to your system or your customers. And if a problem does arise, you're able to resolve it in sort of that next phase. So as code is being released and tested, you're sort of building this confidence, and you can gradually turn on this flag for your end users in segments. And so maybe beta users, specific tiers of customers, and then you can continue to test and validate along the way. And then eventually, once it's validated and you've built the confidence in sort of that feature set, you can release to 100% of your users. So throughout this process, what happens if an error occurs? How do you instantly roll back and turn off that feature without sort of end user disruption and the need to deploy or the need to redeploy? And so what I'm getting at here is having smaller deltas, smaller increments of change. The validation of sort of that occurs when you're continuously testing during the release progression is one of the cornerstones of this process. If you make a small change, there is a little chance that it will go wrong enough to break something significant. And so you can sort of think about this as playing penny slots. It takes a lot of effort and a lot of time to lose thousands of dollars in penny slots. Most people will not notice, a single loss. But if you start, losing thousands of dollars at blackjack, you'll definitely notice. And so that's sort of the analogy of making smaller bets and smaller deltas. And so something that I want to just touch on here is we talked about feature flags, how that enables you to, you could sort of release smaller sets or smaller portions of features behind a flag. But there's like two portions of progressive delivery. There's the deployment and the release, but also the mean time to resolution. And so when we talk about releasing smaller increments, let's talk about sort of that recovery aspect, because now you're deploying features behind a flag. You've integrated your sort of feature management tool. How do you enable your teams to discover, if something did go wrong in a way that's quick, and you're able to revert that change in a way that doesn't hinder any other processes. And so here I have a little GIF of LaunchDarkly integrated into Datadog, and you can sort of see we've integrated in such a way that SREs or DevOps teams are able to see, hey, this is when a flag change occurred, and this is when we saw a spike in one of our metrics. And so you're able to quickly understand where that change happened, go back to your feature, toggle it off, and you're no longer looking through data and logs to understand what was that release and what do we need to roll back. And the last thing I want to talk about is sort of the capabilities that you're unlocking with feature flags. When you're releasing in smaller increments, you're able to run, you're able to gather data, you're able to experiment by targeting specific users or groups of users. You're able to iterate quickly on that feedback and determine if you want to move ahead full force with that change or shift into a different direction. And I think making those smaller bets, gathering data and iterating quickly allows you to make decisions that are a little bit less risky to the business. And it can be very appealing to other stakeholders within the organization. We can skip that, Heidi. And so safer releases at scale. You need to be able to sort of deliver faster releases at scale to minimize the blast radius when things do go wrong. And we talked about that with releasing and then discovering sort of when things do go wrong. There are attributes of that where maybe you want to understand sort of give someone else the responsibility of recovering from that thing that did go wrong, and feature flags allow you to sort of give the responsibility onto the SRE completely to say, hey, if something did go wrong, you don't need to wake me up at 3 in the morning. You're able to sort of quickly turn that off. And again, going back to sort of this in 2021, the state of feature management reports, one of the top reasons why people use feature flags was related to reducing risk and stress around deployments. And sort of everything that we went over today, feature flags sort of allow organizations and teams to have that safety net where they're able to move a little bit faster. And here, I will give it to Andrew to sort of walk you through feature management in LaunchDarkly, what that looks like, and really sort of display the capabilities of decoupling deploy and release, but also how to recover from things that may go wrong.
I am making Andrew presenter.
Cool. All right. Share away.
There you go.
Good. Restart fixed everything as it usually does. Awesome. Cool. Well, thanks, Amy. So yeah, as Uni said, I'm going to kind of walk us through kind of what are the things that we spoke to just now. What does it look like within our application itself? So really, my aim here is to give you a quick of being able to use one, and just kind of basics of flag, understand understanding of how that base part of the tool works, and then speak how we're not just that base tool, but a management platform where the tool is utilized across your entire organization and across your tech stack. So to begin, let's pretend I'm a release engineer now, and we're now looking at my lovely LaunchDarkly demo site, which is very real in the sense it's up in AWS. It's not running localhost. It's very fake in the sense that all this is made up for the demonstration. And let's pretend it's Monday morning, and a project manager has come to me and says, "Hey, Andrew, one of our engineers over the weekend finished that chat message that they want set up so we can talk with our customers better. Go ahead and release it to the world." And what that looks like for me as a release engineer for the LaunchDarkly demo site, because you use feature flags, is navigating to this tab here, which is LaunchDarkly itself. So what you see is a list of options, different features, which determine how the preceding page operates. Specifically for today, I'm looking for the chat feature. So I create stuff like filter that I'm interested in. This big shiny on-off button here for enabling the feature. I'm going to go ahead and click that because I'm releasing this to the world, right? Auditability for why I'm doing this. I was told it's ready for production. That change gets this chat features. That's great, but clearly this picture is loaded. We'll have started chatting, attempting to use the service. Whatever it is, it's not working the way it's supposed to. My same project managers may be throwing things at me from across the room, or lighting me up on Slack, or my pager duty is going. Either way, the world's not happy because this feature has failed. But thankfully, because we use feature flags for this release process, the reversion is going back to this LaunchDarkly tab, clicking this big shiny on-off button. Why I'm turning this off and saving the change, and the feature being gone. So this is really the base case of allowing me to come to work on LaunchDarkly early in my career. That exact kind of scenario, and 6 hours of my day was ruined. Right, at best, I could just revert to the most the previous version. At worst, I was cleaning up dirty data, waiting for network connections to fail over blue green, deployment videos, et cetera, et cetera. So really, that's kind of a no-brainer on why I use feature flags at a base case. But as you alluded to, there's a lot more to this, and there's a progressive process of not just all on and off. Like, this is powerful enough, but you can do this in a much more nuanced way. This kind of sledgehammer turns into a scalpel very, very quickly. Is if I click in, we see a lovely set of tabs controls, but this first one is the meat of the party, and it's our targeting page. What we allow here is the ability to take a complex user attributes and use these to they're not a user shown a feature or not. For example, the chapter we just showed you, for example, I have entire population and then remove it. Most of our users' first step is that as they progress and get better at their release process and using feature flags, typically the next thing is a percent rollout. And what this means is I could have done that same release earlier in the call, but imagine a world where I showed only 10% of my user population. That same page duty, those same alerts, all that stuff, everything that went bad, I at least could know that this only affected 10% of my user base. And that's a typical first step in getting more complex using feature flags. What's better is having an actual targeting rule where it's a set of just blanket treating everybody the same and then doing a central rollout. We're able to do something intelligent, like our quality assurance team in our instance and nobody else. So this is on the line that progressive rollout, right? We're not just blindly pushing things out into production. We have nuanced control over who's able to see features. And with this capability and our ability to say someone's part of a QA team or part of an individual team, we can selectively control, basically who sees the feature. And that's the primary use case for feature flags and LaunchDarkly. There's a couple of targeting rules here that I'm going to skip over because they're not necessarily important at the moment. But I want to then go to what is this platform, right? What we're selling you or selling the concept of this world is basically global if statements that are accessible in under 200 milliseconds, which is really powerful when you think about it. And the problem most people run into when they start using feature flags is the management scale, and that's where we really help you out. So for starters, your targeting page. The second here is something we just came out called workflows. So as you can imagine, anybody could come in and make changes. We want to make this something best for your company to control how your application operates. But that's obviously very important, and only certain people are allowed to do certain things. So we have this thing called workflows, which allows you to make chained events. For example, I could create a progressive rollout. As I mentioned before, this one would just do a percentage rollout from 10%, adding every day. Basically, automatically first day, 10% of my population, 30%. But I can add things like approvals in this process that'll connect to your SSO provider and your given permission scheme. So for example, here I could say add a pause in this stage where I need Aaron's approval before moving on in the service. And this is a great thing for centralized authentication and authorization, which is really important to most large companies. And the workflow process has made that really easy, right? You can have a set of 18, a set of beta users allowed to your general population, and use that workflow repeatedly for kind of consistent experience throughout the release process. Next tab in there to help you out, and I just have to go back here, is our Insights tab. A lot of people, want to know what's going on with their application. We are a lot of information when you're operating, when the flags are evaluated. So give you things like this Insight tab, which shows you, what has been flagged recently, recent changes. This is part of our strategy towards visibility in the sense that, like we showed before, I think it was a gift for New Relic. We want to make sure you have a high level of visibility for the states of flags, because this is determining how your application is operating in production. So this Insights tab is just a small taste of the visibility features that we give you. And just wanted to note that one there. Okay. Next thing that's of interest on page that wanted to show people. We're asking you to add your code, right? And we understand feature flags, just like any DevOps tool, no matter how you slice it, it's some form of technical to your application to use the tool. So there's a balance of handling, when tech needs to be cleaned up properly. And for that, we created this tab here called Code References. So clicking on here, what this does, this is an open source command line tool that we created. It works with GitHub Actions, but you can also just run it in a terminal if you want to, or in a Jenkins script. But effectively what it does is it goes through your Git repository, finds instances of flags that are in use, and gives you a nice link to them for the purposes of cleanup. You can optionally send this to us. You don't have to send it to the screen, of course, and you can choose to send less lines. But really, this is all in the world of making sure that you have a nice, healthy process of using your flags, releasing them, and cleaning them up when they're done with them. We found the primary reason flag that occurs is, like most tech debt, just simple fear, uncertainty, and doubt of, if I remove this, what goes wrong? We added this feature in here to kind of, again, help you from a management platform take care of feature flags. And the next bit I want to get into, 20 minutes to the hour, all of this, all of these actions are again connected to your SSO provider, and we have custom roles, American IAM roles, which have an audit trail, which we keep the life account. For example, I know this isn't really interesting, but this was me a moment ago saying, I disabled chat feature, and really it's a JSON blob, right? This can be pushed to a data lake if you're choosing. This is the life of the account. So I covered controls there, the audit log, flag, functions themselves. And there was one other bit I wanted to get to before integrations. Actually, I'll just go to integrations now. Normally, when we do kind of like a deep dive demonstration, I would go into specifics of some of these times. But since there's a wide audience and specifically on the call, I'll just do the scroll through our integrations page to get a flavor of first-class integrations we have for launch. This list keeps growing, but it is best already. You'll see many of the services you know and love, but a lot of them kind of extend that same progressive delivery and visibility concept, right? We want to make sure that you're understanding what state is, so we have the teams when a flag change occurs. We have the new Relic integration, which allows you the ability to set up automated triggers that'll disable the flag should you have an issue. Slack application is great for two-way communication, turning flags on and off and being notified of flag state. We also connect with your ticketing systems up in Azure. We have generic triggers, and we connect with things like Jira and Bitbucket as well.
Hey, Andrew, we got a question that said, can we specific users? Could you go back to targeting and show how that might work?
Sure. So if I go back here, so if I go back to this chat feature, and I didn't go to this before, but this targeting page is a top-down drop-down, a top draw logic list. And I skipped over these top two sections when I spoke to it. So I showed you the default rule first, and then this section for making targeted rules. And then we have these two sections here for prerequisites and then targeting individual users. So targeting individual users, go ahead and click that. And I can type in a key if I know the key of the individual user, or if the service has seen the user before, I can simply select them from this drop-down. And even more interesting, let's say, this chat feature was, let's say this was an enterprise feature I wanted to a customer for a temporary period of time, say, Aiden here. I could not only turn on this feature for just Aiden, I could even schedule it such that, Aiden only had access until tomorrow afternoon for this particular flag, and in an unattended fashion, Aiden would lose access tomorrow. Yeah, that's how you would target individual users.
Where are the users coming from, by the way?
Excellent.
The list, the drop down, right?
Do y'all have any other questions? You can either unmute and ask directly, or type them in chat, and I will pass them on.
I'll unmute and ask another one. On the same vein as targeting a customer, is there a way to make a feature available that customers can choose to turn on?
Sure. So really at the end of the day, we're a rules engine, and we're reliant on you that applied those rules. So basically, that same user object that you in your app, you would just have, say that dates one of the attributes to say, hey, I opted in as a beta user, and then you can use that as a target role.
Right. So you just build the UI for the trigger yourself.
Correct. Yeah. People typically put on the settings page. If you remember, like Google Labs, that was all user-driven selected feature flags.
Nice.
We opted in this stuff. Yeah.
I don't jump ahead, but are you going to show us a little code? What it looks like in the code?
I can show you some code. I didn't know if you wanted to go there, but yes, I certainly can. And actually, just before I do, I haven't shown. I show you. We have multiple response types. We have clean, string, numeric, JSON. So we have true or false. We even have response speed variation. This is a way to some system. I've also seen people use this to control rate limiting different services by using the integer-based but get that out of the way real quick because I forgot to do it during the targeting part. Go into code, we have a great little kind of get started documentation. Which one way
Does anybody have a language they prefer?
That's a good question.
So, pick your favorite.
Yeah. Here, I think it just defaults to Java, if I recall correctly. Yeah. So, old O code that most people, so ignoring kind of the things. This is the simplest example of using directly with flag. Hopefully, the text is large enough. So, what's happening is you're inputting our SDK into your chosen language. We have 26 now, I believe. They're all open source. And this is the primary way you would integrate launch target flags. So importing the SDK is step one. And then step two is creating this client object. So when we're creating this client object, two things are happening. We're first reaching out with this secure key, which references a specific set of feature flags and rules, basically your business logic in our SaaS offering. It reaches out, gets a copy of that, and puts it into local memory in your application. Also, the second thing it does is it creates a long-lived HTTPS connection that basically stays listening for changes from our service for flags being turned on and off. So when I try to chat from on to off that long connection, that's how service knew something changed. So you have this client, the listener, has a set of rules. Once you have those two running, basically just a process of building user objects with attributes and a rule set in the client. So for example, we have this user object. The only required thing is a unique ID. Everything else is optional. You can have as much as you want, and it can be custom. So first name, last name, if you choose. You have a custom value. This is where we would maybe identify Bob here as being one of our beta testers, right? Speaking to kind of what you mentioned before about how can people opt in, you would augment part of the object user to say, hey, Bob is obviously the user. And then after that, it's really just a function of evaluating that user object against the rule set and coming to a conclusion. Happens to be a Boolean example, and it's the same for the string and JSON and integer response as well. You're basically saying, hey, flag you want to know the result for, what user object is of interest to me. In this example, we're looking at Bob here, and then we have a hard callback value. Just in case for some reason everything fails, we're intentionally set to never be walking on your code. After that, it's just a simple function of choosing to go down one path or another, and that's where the speed comes from when it comes to reverting your release process, like that feature, right? When I clicked the button from on to off, I didn't add or remove code. I just simply told the application to navigate a different code path in real time, right? In production. That's a simple code example that maybe spawned question, maybe not.
I have a question. You can use the wrapper, right? So the company, you create your own wrapper and wrap your SDK.
I'm glad you mentioned the code references earlier, because I can imagine the stuff being left around.
Yeah. Yeah. In the early days, 4 years ago, I before code references existed, my only real for cleanup was to tell people, when they make the pull request to add that also flag. So you have a dangling branch around. That's not a great strategy. It was really awesome to have code references come along to people to not divert to it and find.
Can you hear me? Hello.
Yes.
Sorry. Can you talk a little bit about the wrapping your SDK for the like enterprise use? So like in the company can wrap it inside my own library and then get people like inference the common behavior that way for when the people are referring to connect user feature flags. Like instead of loading USDA, they're going to be instead of loading your library, they're going to be loading my company's library, which will be loading. Start in that way. I can always ensure that that's connecting what I wanted, enforcing certain behavior. I believe it's called wrapper.
Yeah, all of the SDKs. I mean, really, our service is we're a REST first based engineering shop. Or for the most part, just about everything is a REST endpoint before it's available to the public. Really, the SDK is doing, there's more to it than just that. A lot of it is just the niceties around communicating with that REST service, and it's open source, right? This is all you can write around this SDK and then communicate with us. We're not going to help you write that wrapper necessarily, but you're definitely welcome to do it. I'm not sure what you mean by like speaking to it more, like strategies around it, or if that's common. It is definitely common. Like I've had clients who initially wrapped the SDK, for example, to only start with Boolean flags, right? And then they allow integer flags, string flags later on after people were trained up.
Yeah, exactly what I'm talking about. I want to control the rollout, right, of the launch directly across the company.
Yeah, definitely doable. I've had clients do it. It's an important part for a lot of organizations.
Thank you. One more question. I asked it, but my mic wasn't working. So, the users that you are showing the Dave question, where's that list coming from?
The users. Just to be sure, when I went in here.
Yes.
This list of users.
Yes.
So when you're doing the feature flags, right? We're rules and we rely on you to tell us who the people are to enact the rules, but we're not a data store. That is to say, we don't necessarily need to release data, and this stuff is all optional to send up. So it's a nice to have that it shows up here, but it isn't required. And how this gets here is every time you evaluate a user object, we push up edge the attributes. So this is an example user from me earlier today that was simply a Campbell. It was a very simple user object, not the most interesting. I was just testing, and we can see those attributes here. However, it's not guaranteed to be here. You could have also marked these attributes as private and have appeared in our web UI here. So you can still do that local flag evaluation without exposing that data here. So control example I always give is I could have a rule that says, hey, this flag is shown to people whose name begin with letter B, and then I could have the name attribute but mark it as private. I could still mark or still evaluate as true local memory for Bob and Billy and Barbara. I would never show in the web UI here those specific names. So it's an optional thing to have that the names are there. Happen we encounter a user evaluated flag against them. You can manually load it too, but by default, that's usually how it gets in there.
Okay, thank you. Is manual load, is that the command line?
No, there's a bulk user function. There's also, you could just hit endpoint and identify against a bunch of rapidly on a list. That would be more command line. Oh, and you could also technically connect to, you have a function called segments, and then big segments, which allows you to connect to some third-party cohort identifiers that could pull user data as well. But that's slightly different.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Question. See, so I probably just put it.
We have right now is it a good rule of thumb that if we can code something in a supported language, we can feature flag it?
If you, yes, the extreme, obviously, long darkly, we love feature flags, and we love for every change to be behind a feature flag, right? This is something that sounds a little, it might sound a little much at first, but really, if it's something you truly adopt, and I've seen clients do this, literally every release becomes a non-issue because every change is behind a flag, and you're confident that even broken code out in production isn't going to ruin your day because you know the flag is designed to change. And if you follow through that process, if you really are truly dedicated to every change being behind a flag, you also gain the benefit of knowing that we do release to production, even if even if many changes are around. If anything goes wrong before you alter your flag states, you're definitely dealing with a deployment issue, right? Your hardware is having a problem, not code, and that kind of makes your troubleshooting a lot easier. But yeah, I feel great.
I think one thing I'll add to that is flag should have limited scope, of course, but one rule of thumb is imagine sort of the smallest unit of logic for the most sort of responsive flag. So if you have sort of a launcher that's being released, like a dashboard with 3 widgets, like my recommendation would be to have one flag for each widget and then have like a master flag that controls the entire dashboard, that you're able to like disable small units, but still sort of serve that larger dashboard without too much impact. And then just backing for conversation, I'm not sure if you're able to see the chat, but I also shared a best practices doc that we have on creating wrappers and writing them and sort of patterns that we've seen work.
Oh, awesome. Nice.
Yeah.
We also got asked, there is a maximum number of flags or when it starts to cause performance issues.
Yeah. Do you want to take that, Andrew?
Sure.
I think there's like several ways to think about define performance issues. The first one is within the dashboard itself. If you have a lot of flags, and if you start adopting feature flags as a practice, ensure that the team understands what those flags are, what they do, because as you accumulate tons of flags and the practice is proliferating across the organization, having that understanding of what logic that flag controls is going to be critical. So performance issues in terms of like an error, I think, is one thing to think about. And then in terms of just the number of flags, there is performance issues from a launch SDK perspective. Flags as you'd like. It's more on, I would say, like the process people aspect. Anything you would add to that?
Yeah, I definitely agree. It's typically like people in process. Most people don't run into it, but like in an environment, if we wanted to say around 10,000 is like kind of where the targeting payload starts larger, right? So as you can imagine, this list of flags here it's basically represented as a number, and the more target rules function of megabytes over wire and time. For the vast majority of our users, it never comes up. But if you really mix the top, that we can help you with if you get there. But you really got to try.
Yeah, that could take into account not just flags, but individual users that you're even targeting those flags to that field.
No, I was more asking because I'm in a situation where a customer they have launch starting, but they don't use it. It's too much work. But then they have releases where it's a challenge and release because everything is old. They'll push out like 15, 20 changes, and then it's either live with it or they have to roll everything back. But they don't use launch correctly. They have. So that's what I was asking.
What was
we all have to
Yeah.
That seems terrible.
Yeah, we'd love to know who it is. Don't you don't have to call about audibly here, I guess.
I don't know. I really can't. But I really needed this to learn more about LaunchDarkly.
Hard to make it acceptable to developers and to make and stuff accessible to developers, so that developers can wrap their code in and release.
Well, I also, when you talk about unit, I think the way to direct it to the dev teams is just if your tickets are minimal product, that makes sense. Your ticket is simply do that dashboard with 3 units. Maybe what they need to do is break that down into smaller pieces.
Could be. We didn't get into all of the targeting. There's a really nice targeting feature requisites. So if that dashboard has 3 pieces, you can go ahead and make for each of the 3 pieces, turn on and test them, but they won't go live until the prerequisite flag things up 100. Still have one.
Yeah, but you could do control that also, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, this was great for me. This really fits
We-
for what I needed.
Welcome. I think Heidi answered most of that.
So I might have missed a few seconds of there. So, if I have a microservice like application, so it means like group. Sorry, let me rephrase that. Let's say I have a feature that requires changes in multiple microservices, right? So this means I can group feature flags and then release all at once, and then if I want, I can block all at once.
Yes, and one way that we see people use this a lot is they have a test environment where the top prerequisite flag is on, so they can test all of that without exposing it to anybody until it's all ready. We use this for marketing, like a rebrand transition. So we had dozens of features of like, change the icon, change the, all of the things about the appearance of the page. You can test them, turn it all on in production without having to push anything new out.
Yeah, that's nice.
I have another question. How do you guys do train up the developers to teach them how to do this? Because I think various places will, sometimes they'll let the developers just learn their own, sometimes they'll actually invest in them.
I think that's something that we're working on adding capacity for. We have a lot of resources. Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, Heidi, I can take that one right before I jump off. So the Solutions Architect team at LaunchDarkly helps a lot of our customers, throughout this journey in terms of adding feature flags is just one piece of the puzzle, but how do you incorporate that into a larger, framework of all the steps that you need to make this possible. And so we are spinning up a professional services organization and consulting to help with that right now. They're keen to sort of help with all of that. That's where you'll see a lot of the best practices documentations that I'm sharing in chat. We're trying to make it accessible async as well. That helps.
Yeah.
I have a question. Hi. Can you speak to when is the relay proxy appropriate? When does the use of the relay proxy make sense?
You want to take that in?
Sure. There's only a couple of instances, and if you look on the GitHub page, and even Docs page, there's a little kind of three-part section like when to use this. But effectively, for those who don't know, what he's referring to, the long relay proxy, it's basically a copy of our OSDK with networking capabilities that acts as a redundancy point inside of your network for serving major flags. So when this becomes useful, the kind of the most extreme version is our on-prem users. So imagine, for example, somebody with a warehouse full of IoT devices that speak to one another that need feature flagging to control that process, but you don't want them talking to the general internet, right? We are a SaaS offering or AWS. We can't talk to something that isn't on the internet. So in that situation, you would need that relay to act as presence for flags, and that's an air-gapped solution. So that's one reason for using relay. The next most common one is, or not common, I shouldn't say common or not. Next option is reason reducing network connectivity, right? You have many instances of clients being made with many SDKs running, many instances of your application internally. Maybe your security team doesn't want all those outbound connections made to our SaaS offering. In that world, you as the one connection out to our service, and then you release that data to however many you have run locally. So you can collapse that kind of that spread of connections. So that's the next thing. Another common reason, or another valid reason, is for when you're using one of our services where either we don't want to direct SDK for it, or if it's one of the rare languages that is completely untrusted in their local operation, specifically PHP. So PHP has a shared architecture, can't be trusted, and so we do it that way. In those instances, we advise you set up a relay instance, which basically monitors, or rather maintains the flag rules in a low memory like REST that PHP can access and still use, but it's basically it's maintained by the relay itself. So those are like the three most common reasons. In the before time, a couple of years back, people might have also used it for a redundancy standpoint, right? So if for some reason LaunchDarkly, our service poofed out of existence, we're globally distributed at this point, you can keep operating continually with relay instance in your service. However, we've reached a point of redundancy where if that is the reason you're adding the relay, is to add redundancy, you're going to have a hard time matching our 349 stability anyhow. So we don't really advise that anymore if that's the primary reason. So,
okay.
So yeah, it's air gap reasons, security control, or dealing with services that need specialized communication with PHP or Lambda instances that, should only run something in memory and don't have the time to make the connection.
So, thank you. Speaking of the redundancy, what happens if you go down?
Nothing. Same thing that happened the second before we went down. Because you're not calling back to LaunchDarkly to find the rules. The rules and evaluation set is already in your code. So if you can't reach LaunchDarkly, first of all, something had gone very wrong with AWS and Fastly, which you probably have bigger problems. But second of all, the only thing that happens LaunchDarkly is down, so you can't change how rules evaluate.
Can I set up like a default setting? So if LaunchDarkly is not available, like here's the by default things are on, here's the things that are on, right?
Yep.
Yeah. Go back to. Here we go. So if I go back to the code there, so in the most failure mode where LaunchDarkly isn't available and there's no relay instance reference at all, it's this value here that's executed. So this will be the local hard-coded fallback value for if absolutely everything fails, and that's how you control that. You always fail like a known state. But after you've connected and made this client object up here, when that's in a running steady state, listening for changes, has a local copy of the rules to reference. So even if it loses connection, it won't notice. It'll continue to be operated. It'll have a local copy. It'll continue to make local distinctions correct according to the last known best set of rules. But it won't stop just because, for some reason it lost the connection to us for any amount of time. Really.
Okay, thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
Do we have any other questions?
You guys manage environments, like development, stage, production?
Sure. So like most modern things, the app starts in the top left here. And if you see on my mouse, I'm at the support services project is what we call this text. And just below it is the A. Campbell environment. So basically, the biggest conceptual thing in LaunchDarkly is a project. So services, and what the project is the collection of environments. We're looking at specifically Campbell. So the way to separate is by SDK keys. So if I go to account settings here, go to my projects, just as an example, pull up support service. And so for example, my environment there that we saw, these are my keys, evaluate flags, and set demo environment. And what's distinct from environment to environment is the configurations of the flag. What's the same from environment to environment is the availability of the flags. So that is to say the chat feature, while it might be on in my environment, but often in another environment, is available in both, right? It's just the configuration that differs. And so, this is A. Campbell, but this could easily be dev or staging or production. And if I go back over here, feature flags, we give you hair function, from environment to environment, dev, stage. Environment or dev and staging.
Got it. Thank you.
Any other questions? No, folks drop off. Let's see. Okay, back to 11.
Well, thank you all for attending and for sharing some questions and some time with us. We really appreciate it.
I'm sorry. Can you do how do you sign up? How do you like?
Oh, how to do a
yeah. Talk about your plans, about the options, right? Thank you.
It's closer to you than me, Andrew.
This is unfortunate. I think Heidi and I are the nerds. We don't typically deal with the business plan. We do have the business parts of us have left. A 2-week trial you can sign up for. If you want to do kind of a larger enterprise trial, and that's something that we encourage you to talk to our sales team for, because we different things that change from an enterprise standpoint. But then before that, we do have kind of a starter plan and a pro plan. You can simply go to our website and swipe your credit card and start using feature flags inside 20 minutes. The nerds don't have on this because, again, I'm a nerd, not the.
Do not send the right people to answer that question.
Yeah, I intentionally don't know that number just because it's better than I know.
Yeah.
No, honest. Thank you very much.
Anyways.
Guys, that was great.
Great. Thanks, folks.
Thank you all. Thank you very much again.
You're welcome. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you. Have a good evening, everybody.
Bye.
You too.
Bye.
Have a good one.